Hi guys, welcome to my channel. For today's video, I'm excited to be showing you how I created this Christmas tree wood advent calendar. Let's get started. So to start off, you're going to need two 1 by 4 by 8 pieces of wood, as well as a 2 by 4 by 8. Those are the only pieces of wood that you'll need, and you'll have a little bit left over. What you want to do first is stain them or paint them. So I've chosen to stain them using my wax, and I'm using a combination of the Annie Sloan dark wax and the Annie Sloan black wax. First I will do the black wax, then I will do the dark wax. When you're applying the wax, you do not have to worry about your brush strokes. You want to go in all sorts of random strokes and then wipe off the excess, so that way the wood soaks it in and you can't see the brush. For the staining and cutting, I'm not going to be doing this in my regular craft room, so the lighting is a little bit different and the angles are a little bit off because I just don't have that room to set up my camera properly so that you guys can see everything. This is kind of like our storage furnace area. I've set it up there just because it's really cold outside and I did not want to be cutting this outside right now. Because I'm all about doing things on a budget and saving money, what I'm doing here is I'm measuring the 2 by 4 to see if how long I'm going to need it, because that's going to be my stick part, the part that holds the Christmas tree. So I want to measure how long of it I need to stain, so I'm not wasting my stain on something else. And especially if I wanted to use a different stain or whatever, it'll just be less work in the end because I save all of my wood. So as I said, as I'm staining them in black first, and then I'm using my dark wax. Now the dark wax, I'm really low on. As you can see, there's barely anything in there. It was enough for this project. I have picked up the Rust-Oleum Java decorative glaze. So we'll see how it compares to the Annie Sloan. I've used Annie Sloan for years, so this is a big deal for me to be switching, but I thought I'd give it a try. We don't have a local vendor for Annie Sloans. I have to go out of town a little bit, and I just did not have the time for that right now. So I thought I would give this one a try and see if I like it. It is cheaper too, so we'll see if it lasts me as long as Annie Sloan did, but I still love the Annie Sloan wax. It does not take too long for the stain to set. So once it's set, the wax is kind of dried off a little bit. What you want to do is measure out your cuts. So what I'm doing is because I'm making two, I'm cutting two 12-inch long pieces, two 16-inch long pieces, two 18-inch long pieces, two 20-inch long pieces, and two 22-inch long pieces. Then I'm cutting my 2 by 4 um, into 72 inches, and then I'll cut it in half at 36 inches. The reason I'm doing the first cut for 72 inches is because it'll be easier. Like I said, I don't have a lot of room, so it'll be easier for me to just handle a smaller piece of wood than a longer piece of wood. Make sure you measure twice and cut once, so that way you're not making mistakes. There was a little spot where I had to adjust a little bit, which will affect when I'm putting my hooks in, but that's okay. I made it work. Just make sure you're measuring carefully and you're cutting carefully. You're being very careful when you're using these power tools. This was my very first time since grade 7, when I had whole like design and technology, I think it was called, that I'm actually using this kind of power tool. So I was very excited to use the saw, and it's opened up a whole world of things for me where I don't have to rely on someone else cutting it for me. So I'm very excited. When you're cutting, you want to make sure you measure out however long your board is. You measure out what cuts you're going to make to waste the least amount of wood. I was able to use just 2 pieces of 8 foot long of the 1 by 4 by 8, and I still had a little piece left over. So measure however long you want to make this, so that way you're using the least amount of wood. I will give you my measurements, but it really is up to you because you might not want to make it so big. and you might not be using such wide pieces of wood. The reason I chose to use these pieces of wood instead of something different was they were thin enough to hold everything, but strong enough to hold everything, but thin enough that they weren't too bulky. I also had them on hand. They were leftovers from a different project. So to me, they cost me nothing. Once you've cut them, you want to make sure you sand off any of the pieces where the wood is sticking out, so that way you don't get any splinters. So that's what I'm doing here. Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to wax the sides of the little pieces of wood, so that way they're nice and finished. So after you finish waxing them and they dry off, then you want to go ahead and assemble the hooks. But before you do that, you should prepare your whatever your cups or your things are going to be that you're using. So that's what I did. I actually wound up painting these while the wood was curing, but you do it whenever you want to. So I'm using these little cups from the little buckets from the Dollar Tree, and I'm using this Rust-Oleum brushed nickel paint. However, I wind up spray painting them in gray first, and then I just spray that over top as a top coat. Then I did not have enough of these little buckets because they are actually left over from my wedding. So what I wound up using was yogurt containers. So one of them is with the buckets and the other one is with the yogurt containers. And they're the Liberté yogurt. They're nice and big containers and they're all plastic. There's no paper or anything in them. So I'm going to be spray painting them in just a Painter's Touch, Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch gray paint. Winter gray, I believe is what it's called. Gray. And then I spray paint over top with the brushed nickel to give it a little bit of a galvanized bucket type of feel for both. I did wind up using 2 cans of the gray for 50 buckets and then about half of that brushed nickel paint. So it is quite a bit of paint. I did 3 coats, so 2 coats of the gray and 1 coat of the brushed nickel, but I think they turned out really pretty. You don't have to use these buckets if you don't want to. I found that the little burlap sacks were a little bit pricey on Amazon, so I didn't want to order them, and I had everything on hand. The only thing that I bought were the little, and you'll see there's little black bags that I bought in them, but they were 10 for $1, so they were quite cheap. So when you're putting these hooks on, I had a bit of trouble with this only because I was not able to divide them for some reason in my head. I could not do it. So also some of the cuts weren't quite at 12 inches and quite at 16 inches, which is what I told you before. That's why it affected my hook placement. So basically what you want to do, each one of these pieces of wood, you want to move your first and last hook to be 1 inch away from the end, and then you divide in between that space, you divide how many you need. So the first piece of wood, the smallest one, the 12-inch, I had 3. The 16-inch, I had 4. The 18-inch, I had 5. The 20-inch, I had 6. And the 22-inch, I had 7. You don't have to do it this way. This is the way I did it. I will put the spacing in between each for you, but it really depends how you've cut your wood. So you just have to make sure that you leave about an inch from each side, and that's kind of your measurement. You put your hooks on there, and then you divide whatever's in between there into however many hooks you want to do. Some of you might do an advent calendar that's 24 days, so that'll affect that as well. It's really up to you, but this is what I've done. I will put it in my description, but it depends. You might want to cut your boards so that it's an easy division. Do you know what I mean? So like you have your 22-inch board, you take 1 inch from each, and then you divide that 20 inches by 4. So it leaves you 5 inches in between each. That's easy math. Rather than dividing it by 6, well, 20 divided by 6 is a little bit harder. So it really is up to you. This is what I've done. It was maybe a little bit more difficult, but not too bad. I mean, it's simple math still. If you can't do it in your head, which I mean, it's very hard to divide 20 by 6 in your head, you could use a calculator or you could do it approximately. That's up to you. So also I want to mention these long pieces of wood that I used, they're the construction grade wood. So there's a lot of nicks and they're uneven. They're not the straightest. So it's hard to measure even like the middle of the piece of wood. It was hard to measure because some spots were a little bit wider than the other because it's a cheap piece of wood. It was about $2, I think, for that 8 foot long piece when we bought it because we bought it for a different project. I like it because it looks aged, but it makes it hard for measuring. So if you buy better quality wood, it'll be nice and even and you'll be able to measure it perfectly. But for the sake of saving money and also for the look, because I love the aged look of things, this was the way I chose to go, and I will always use these pieces of wood for all of my projects because they just give that aged look that I always go for right now in my home decor, or well, I have for several years. So just keep that in mind. The hooks that I'm using are just the cup hooks, and they were for a pack of $45 at Home Depot, so not too bad. I thought you could get them at the dollar store. I couldn't find them, so I went this route. And all I did was I used just a long screw, and when I measured where I wanted them to go, I hammered it in, and then just to make a little bit of a hole, and then I screwed them in. You could pre-drill if you wanted to. I chose not to. I did it this way. It was still fairly easy to do. And again, I've sped all of this up because you don't necessarily need to watch me fumbling and doing this, but this way you get an idea of what I'm doing and I'm talking you through it. Please leave me any questions or comments below if I haven't explained something properly or if I've sped it up too much and you just didn't see it and you really want to make this. Please let me know. I only recorded myself doing the two small ones first, the 12 inches, and then I did everything one by one. Now, also, I just want to mention the first one was a lot harder to do because that's where I had to figure out my measurements. The second set was much easier because I had written everything down and then I just boom, boom, boom marked it off. And I also got myself a nice long stick as my ruler so that way I could mark off the middle line. So that would be easier because I had a bit of a trouble time trying to measure, from the bottom, and I didn't want to do a line, but if you just do a light pencil line, you'll still be able to see it, but then you can't see it once you've put your hooks on and everything. So make sure you mark that off. And that's it. So thank you guys for stopping by my channel. That's not it to the project, but that's it for putting the hooks in. Thank you for stopping by my channel. If you haven't been here before, I do DIYs, Trash to Treasure, Dollar Tree DIYs. I do lots of home decor type of DIYs. I'll occasionally make things like this. I've made my noodle board, like my stovetop tray. I've made this. I made a barn door, which I never recorded that was my very first project that started my love of. I've always had a love of DIY, but really kind of empowered me to do more. So I've created a barn door before. I've done my noodle board tray that I can link the video to here. I've done this. I like to make signs. So all sorts of stuff like that. So if that's something you're interested in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and make sure you hit the notification bell so you can see when I post new videos. Right now I'm doing my 12 days of Christmas and this is day 8 of my 12 days of Christmas. So thank you for watching. Now let's continue on with the project. So once you've got all of your hooks in, then you can go ahead and assemble your Christmas tree. So this is the fun part. So you want to take your 2x4, which is 36 inches long. Then you want to position where you want your Christmas tree to start and where you would like it to end, because you do need a topper for your Christmas tree. So what I did initially was I thought I was going to leave like about 3.5 inches in between each piece. However, that wound up being a bit too much because then my little cups at the bottom would not be able, because I wanted to move it all the way to the bottom. It just didn't have enough room to have that much space and leave a big space at the bottom. So what I wound up doing is I left about 3 inches in between each, and what I did was I put my board on and I measured, and I didn't show myself doing this for some reason, but anyway, I just figured out how big my container was and where I wanted it to sit. And then you have to pre-drill holes into these pieces of wood. If you don't pre-drill holes and try to screw them in, you're going to run into an issue of the wood cracking. So I put 2 screws into each piece of wood, into each branch of the tree, I guess. So I pre-drilled 2 holes and then I screwed them in. And what I did, find something, however much space you want, you can find something and keep that as your guide. So I was using a piece of wood, and keep that as your guide as to where you want, how far you want your branches to be. You could also eyeball it if you didn't want to measure and you just wanted to eyeball it however it looked. It really is up to you, and it depends how much you want to leave from the bottom and how big your containers are too. So keep that in mind if you're when you're putting them on, that you're leaving enough space so your containers aren't sitting one on top of each other. So it just depends on what you're using. So for the little buckets, because they're smaller, the metal tin buckets, I did a 3¼ inches in between each. And then the yogurt containers, I did just under 3 inches because I had that little block that I was measuring. So just under 3 inches in between each. And that's it. So you pre-drill, you screw, and that's it. I'm also going to be hot gluing a star to one of them as the topper, and the topper for the other one is a Santa hat. And I chose 2 different ones because I have 2 different kids and they're not the same the containers are not the same anyway, so I figured it would be okay to have a different topper. So the star I hot glued and the Santa hat I just put on, and here are the finished pieces. The yogurt containers I just hooked on. I made a little hole with a nail and I hooked them on, and then I bought the little black bags which you can find at the dollar store in the wedding section. And they were 10 in a pack, and I thought the black would go really well with this, and I'm loving the way they turned out. I purposely left the inside white on the yogurt containers, and here are the little buckets. I think they turned out cute, and they have the little handles that you can just hook them on, so we didn't have to worry about that. They look a little bit galvanized. I may down the road decide to buy the burlap bags and just use those. It really depends, and you can easily move the wood up and down if you buy something bigger or smaller. So really versatile. I love the way it turned out. It's a little bit late. We're halfway through the Advent calendar season for me to be sharing this video, but I had planned on making this back in July. Then I wanted to do it in September, October, whatever. I started working, ran out of time, but I really wanted to make it for my boys. I had bought them an advent calendar that we started with on December 1st, and then I just moved the stuff over here, and we're continuing on with it today. So I'm really happy with the way it turned out. Hope you guys like it. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you can't do it this year, maybe it'll give you some ideas for next year. Thank you so much for stopping by. Let me know if you have any questions. Let me know what you think and what you use at home. If you have an advent calendar, what do you use for it? So just a quick note. This is Boban no, this is Mikulash the elf, and the other elf hanging off of the hat is Boban. There are elves who also joined in on the fun of the advent calendar. Thank you so much. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Have an excellent day and stay safe.